It had been a golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer.
You went to acting school. You went to film school. You've kind of been immersed in creativity and I wouldn't say like art, but like making little home movies and all this stuff your whole life. Little fake radio shows, like making stuff. But I just don't know that I've really made any work since I've moved to Omaha when I was living in LA. I mean, I wrote all these screenplays and I consider that work, right? Mm-hmm. Even though it was partially for a sort of commercial outcome to sell the screenplay, to get a movie made, at a studio, at an independent, whatever, like to work with people to get a movie made and earn a living from it. But since then, I feel like I've edited hundreds of videos that are capital campaigns, fundraisers, documentary style branded content for this business or that business. We made a big movie for a museum, for like the pre-movie they watch before they go on a tour, all that stuff. And I, look at my channel and all of my channels and all that. And I'm like, am I only making content? Is that all I've really made? And yes, there is creativity in that. Some stuff feels like it's artistic in making it. But ultimately, it feels like the stuff I've made, especially on my main channel, is more analogous to or synonymous with a magazine about art or about creativity or about craft or about the tools to do it, versus the actual work. So, I don't know, just makes me feel like I just haven't made anything. And it kind of bums me out.
Yeah. What do you define as, we were kind of having this discussion before. So it's very strange. Like a portion of the people are actually probably watching this on YouTube.
Yeah.
And part are probably listening on the podcast app. And what we looked at, like something that I was working on, and I had this not realization. I've had this realization before, obviously, but maybe not obviously, but I've had a realization like this before where I told Matt.
Who's Matt?
I told the other guy on the podcast.
Who's Matt?
That. Basically that
0 views.
No, somebody tried to kill Matt. Who's Matt?
Who's Matt?
I told the other person on this podcast that I wanted to film like a narrative style segment, but the first thing I said, the first thing I went to in my first place I went to in my mind was, it's not worth it. This is just for a YouTube video.
Yeah, right.
And even with the podcast, right? People are watching on YouTube, and then some people are listening to it. I found myself getting more excited about the podcast feed than the YouTube. The YouTube thing just seems so. Just
seeing what the audio version is doing.
Yeah,
so much versus what the video.
Because it just feels so much more in my head. My perception seems so much more tangible.
Yeah,
it seems so much more sustainable. Mm-hmm. Doesn't seem like some, just gust of wind that's gonna go. It's gonna continue to move. YouTube has that feeling a little bit.
Yeah, like in 15 years, we'll all be going, remember we used to watch YouTube all the time?
Yeah, and I don't know why.
Yeah,
but I think maybe it's because like with YouTube, you have this structure of like there's YouTube, the company, and then the company is hosting this platform for. It's not like, but with the podcast, we have our hosting website. We have platforms that carry the podcast, but those are just platforms.
Yeah,
it feels like it all kind of starts with just and the files are on our computer. You know, like they're stored in our clouds. It just feels like there's a bit more of a sense of ownership. With YouTube, it kind of feels like we're just renting.
Yeah. Or we're like giving it over to YouTube.
Mm-hmm. And it just feels like a place where, obviously, like there's so much on YouTube. There's so much content. There's such a library of things. And when I say content, I don't just mean like things to consume to entertain. There's great interviews, historical interviews. There's documentaries that you can't find anywhere else. There's really solid stuff. It's a great library.
Yeah.
But it does feel just less substantial for some reason.
Yeah.
Like almost
like
maybe to a lesser degree than like an Instagram or something. Like Instagram is it's a joke.
I wonder if it's like
Instagram, like putting work on Instagram, Facebook as like that is the primary and a lot of people have made great careers out of doing this.
Yeah.
And I'm not criticizing those people, so don't mix that. But it feels like a joke in the sense that it's a lot of people probably put decent art on their MySpace profiles.
Yeah.
And it just faded. Everything in the internet age kind of seems to come and go.
Yeah.
And I don't know why in the last couple of years there's been a feeling that we almost reached a point where we're like, well, everything that's here is here for good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like YouTube is always going to be around. And in the last couple of years, I don't know why, but I've almost gotten the feeling of like, hey, look, the traffic's there. I don't think it's going anywhere, but it almost feels like this is just another flash in the pan.
Yeah.
And when you make work, it feels like you should have the negative. You should have the control over it, whether it's hosted on your website.
Mm-hmm.
Like use these distribution platforms, but know that that's not the end game. That's just a tool to distribute it.
Yeah.
And then have somewhere where it's like sitting in the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
But getting back to the original point, yeah, I just had that observation of like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to put all this time into this YouTube video.
Right.
Yeah,
and I think
don't know where to take that. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing to explore. Just that, not that we explore it right now, but just that idea that
let's explore it a little bit.
that there's a slight, I don't know if negative, dark cloud, whatever it is, that hovers over that idea. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of the ways that you would make something and exhibit it, something like you showed me, where it would be the opposite feeling. When you talked about, like I was thinking, I'd be, I'm speaking for you. I'd be more excited to see a book I wrote end up in Jackson Street booksellers versus on the shelf at Barnes and Noble, as in Barnes and Noble being the YouTube of books.
Yeah, or maybe it's just like
a Jackson Street being like,
I don't even think it's like an independent thing or like not under some corporate umbrella. I don't think it's that. But
and
it's more the idea behind it. Like I would love to see a book I wrote out there in the world, but then I know that I can look over and I can see a representation of that work in a book. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no matter what happens with the licensing of the book, whoever the current distributor is, whoever the current publisher is, I can look over and be like, look, there's a book that I wrote.
Yeah.
And, no matter what happens, I can just take that copy and hand it to somebody and be like, hey, check this out.
Yeah.
Not that I'm writing a book, but maybe I am. No, I'm just kidding. I'm working on my novel.
Sure.
It's going to be the Great American Novel. So
I think what's interesting for me is I have such an overall positive feeling toward YouTube, because in everything that I've pursued artistically, creatively, I've always needed permission to work.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I have this feeling of excitement with posting something to YouTube because there's nothing in my way from doing it.
Yeah.
So I don't even get to the point where I think, well, what does it mean to post something on YouTube, to have something there,
Yeah.
to be, I'm so excited about, I don't need a director to give me permission to act.
Yeah.
I don't need a studio head to give me permission to work with a team of creatives to turn a screenplay into a movie. I don't have any barriers to do what you did, which was have an idea, start building on it, and then take what you made and distribute it, to exhibit it.
Yeah.
And then let an audience, 100 people watch it, or 100,000 people watch it. And for me, I'm still hooked onto the excitement of that.
Yeah.
To where, although I'm starting to feel aware of content in this this world of thinking. I want to be someone who makes work.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the earlier point. Like, okay, I'm making content, but am I making any work?
I think it comes back to that the quote, the Jurassic Park quote that you gave.
I love that quote,
where
buddy.
it's like maybe we got so excited that we
Didn't stop to think
if we should. The quote works on a lot of levels, but maybe we got so excited about the lack of barriers,
right,
that we forgot. Like, we got so excited about the anti-establishment, like we can just do it.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing stopping us. That the barriers, the gatekeepers that were there. This is not an argument for gatekeepers. The gatekeepers that were there, I should just make my points instead of like giving the preface.
Yeah.
Maybe it would, like, people then can pay attention to the point. And you leave the room. You leave the room for interpretation.
Some spontaneous self-coaching here.
I need to work on that. Yeah.
Tell us in the comments what we both need to work on. I'm trying not to say all the time.
You're so excited about this lack of barriers that you get it into your head like, oh, there's nothing stopping me from being this. Yeah. But then the purpose of gatekeepers in the first place, and yes, there was corruption, and yes, there was, but when that job is being done at the highest level, it is somebody who has an elevated level of taste.
Yep.
And they're keeping, like, they're guarding against things infiltrating the space that they're gatekeeping.
Yep.
They're making sure it meets a certain quality level. Like, you're not just anybody's able to join the club. And I know that seems exclusive and seems elitist, but there's something to be said for that. It
might serve an important function.
You have to be at a certain, and YouTube's taken that away. So everybody's just pushing their first project into the limelight and being like, you should pay attention. And some people have a level of notoriety because of a viral moment or something, whatever, that when they push that is seen as a piece of work in the same light as some of. And so the gatekeeper is designed. Yesterday I told you the idea of, or the quote, you want to look at your superiors in a way. Respect for your superiors comes from the idea that they can step in and do what you're doing better than you can at any time.
Yes.
We're losing that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because everybody can just do anything. We're losing that ability of, like, man, they've really put in the hours and learned the craft. Mm-hmm. And it's becoming more just political now, where you have people that are reaching high levels of status without checking the very basic boxes. I'm not saying I'm checking the boxes or you're checking the boxes. This is a completely different point. But, maybe we get so excited about the lack of barriers that then we just started pushing everything that came to mind out into it. And I think that's part of where the disconnect in YouTube comes from my point of view.
Yeah.
Is I made a bunch of videos because I got excited that you can just make videos. And then after a certain point, I almost had the self-realization that I was just pushing out the same kind of thing.
Yep.
And I wasn't getting anything from it. And if I'm not getting anything from it, I doubt that the people who are watching are getting anything from it. And they might think they're getting something from it, but the whole point, I'm not making, I'm the only reason I'm making things is so I can move forward. I've evolved, get something out of it, learn something from the work. And I think I got you know, personally, I think I got excited about there are no gatekeepers. I can just do this.
Yeah, that's right.
And I didn't stop to think, is this one worth doing? Well, what could make this worth doing? What things could I add to this that would make this worth doing? And
you know,
it's just an interesting thing, right? Like
well,
maybe you got so excited about you'd been gate kept,
yeah,
and that you just started putting it out, and then once you're in that content cycle, it's perpetual. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. So you never have the time to step away and be like, what's the next evolution of this look like?
or how can I self gatekeep to better deploy my taste and curation?
Take the best of the gatekeeping mentality
and deploy it on what I want to make and what I end up making, and then even from what I make, what I end up actually releasing. I think back to the first thing I thought about in saying that was, you know, in the kitchen as a chef, you know, like some of these shows like Kitchen Nightmares or whatever, you know, like you talked about The Superior, you know, they might be like, you were okay with sending this out to the diner? Like this lettuce is wilted, or, you know, it's under seasoned or whatever, you know, is the chef succumbing to the pressure of getting the food out to these people, but at the expense of the integrity and quality, the convictions with their mission, all that stuff. So that kind of free for all that there is when there are no gatekeepers, when there's nobody checking your work, or, you know, the audience does by watching it or not watching it.
We were talking about raising children yesterday and how this is a weird connection that just kind of popped up, but how difficult it is to learn anything without feedback.
Right.
Without feedback from somebody who actually knows.
Yeah.
Like you're just throwing ideas into the ether.
Yeah.
And if nothing's coming back, then you're just going to keep throwing, like, I don't know if that worked. Let's do this and this and this.
Well, and a lot of times the feedback you get with a platform like YouTube is metrics, and you get it from, you know, views or comments. You know, there are elements of feedback, but it might be steering you in a more commerce-based direction. Like, oh, your CTR was low and the view duration was low. And then you might be like, well, what gets higher view duration? Well, if I make fast edits and use this kind of music, and like you start working towards some kind of like a puzzle piece that fits in with just base human psychology, versus, you know, making something that's powerful, moving, impactful, has something to say, or asks an interesting question, something that is compelling work. Sometimes too,
compelling to you. I think like, that's the only metric that matters.
Right?
Do you watch it and you say it's but on it, like, be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
That's one of the keys. Like, you can't, like, you'll watch something and be like, oh man, this is so good. This is so exciting.
Right.
And a lot of the times that's just because it looks like something that you see in your head that you admire.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that per se, but I think you should almost try to challenge yourself to go a layer deeper, or 2 layers deeper, 3 layers. Like, you see something and it's compelling, but then think, is this actually compelling, or is this just aesthetically compelling? Is there is it wrapped in a plastic layer of compelling, but then it's actually just like,
the real substance of it is lacking.
And be honest with yourself when you ask that question. And I wonder if your critique is like, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, it seems like you've kind of come to this conclusion more like within the last 6 months, because we used to have conversations about how YouTube was the work, or almost like was the work for you.
Yeah. Or is it? Yeah.
And then, and it's like, maybe there's a detachment that needs to happen from YouTube, where that's just viewed as a platform. Yeah. And instead of being a YouTuber making YouTube videos, which is just marketing, it's just public relations, it's just branding, you know, YouTuber, you're a YouTuber, you're part of this cult of YouTube. Maybe there needs to be a detachment between that and just like, you just tell stories, interesting stories, whether that's a story about video editing, whether that's a story, and kind of putting that into the context too of what is the diary of that, what is the and I think you do a good job. This isn't me just like
brown.
I think you, like, there's been a clear evolution of you kind of opening up, especially in your videos. Like I watched a video of yours from like 6 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like a studio tour or something.
Right.
And that's a much different,
Yeah.
I'm trying to be something.
This is what people who do what I do are supposed to do.
This is my perception
in
of
a YouTube video. It's a facsimile of.
And you're not, it doesn't feel like that a lot anymore. But yeah, that distinction between why you're feeling like it's not work. I wonder what that is stemming from. Well,
I think it's just there's an imbalance. I feel like I love having conversations about the craft and about the tools to the craft, whether it's video editing, whether it's cameras for photography, cameras for video, talking about like what are things am I seeing in video editing styles, what things am I seeing in the photography world, like when from the actual work people are making. I love having conversations about that. And I like that my channel can be a place where I can make videos that either continue a conversation, start a conversation, certainly like that they can be, hey, if you like this style of editing, here's a tool that can help you do it. And here's how I do it. I had a tutorial recently where I'm like showing people just some basic effects in Final Cut that can make your titles look a little bit less perfectly crisp and digital, and it just have a little bit of a feel of like titles from a 60s or 70s film, where it's a little blurry, there's a little bit of glow to it, there's a little bit of movement because of how they did this or did that, just to give it just less of a crisp digital whatever feel. So I really like doing that. I like if we go to a coffee shop or I go to with Cody or my buddy Nick, like, well, what do you think Apple's going to do next with Final Cut? Or, I want to have those conversations and I want to extend that into YouTube content, but it's occupying too much of what I'm making. I'm not writing poetry. I'm not writing fiction or a screenplay. I'm not going out and working on a photo project and then figuring out how I can print it into a book, or submit it to a gatekeeper to see if it passes muster. I did submit some photos to Aperture's photography contest and haven't heard anything back, other than we received your submission or whatever. I want to make something that is a expression of whatever art what art is. And I think that's it. It's just the content and the conversation about the tools and the trends and the what's going on and all that is taking up this much space. And the work is this tiny little thing where I feel like I'm making work when I'm out taking photographs that I eventually turn into a YouTube video. And I feel like sitting down with that typewriter and writing what I wrote after the guy tried to kill this Matt guy that we keep talking about.
Yeah. I don't know who that guy is. But.
I'm like, this, and I think that's part of why I think up, like then I start like attaching these emotions to typewriters and I'm like, oh, this might be a tool that like gets that out of me or gets me connected with that, because my laptop is like my content making machine. And you know what I mean?
It's like the concept, but part of I have that too. I think a lot of that is like that constant search for, I can't do it, so I need something else, and then that'll be the key that unlocks.
Yes, I mean, I talk about this with my wife. External things that solve internal problems. It's not going to happen. If you need a typewriter to write a poem because you can't do it on a regular laptop,
I think everybody listening has access to these two things,
right?
And that's all you need.
You're coming up with.
We talked about Seinfeld yesterday. Like they would write it with like big pens and
and legal pads. Yeah, if it's in if not to go down another rabbit hole, but like that idea, like, well, it goes back to the thing when I was living in Chicago. My sister said I could have her iBook G3, and I declared at that moment that I could not write another page of a screenplay until I had that tool. Yeah. Like that, if that's out there, that's a possibility. I can't do it.
I'm just gonna turn this just to here. Yeah.
So I think
we just haven't recorded in a while. I'm concerned about levels.
That's and my levels are always kind of. I should probably just stick it because I don't turn this way. So yeah, I think that's something that I'm grappling with, and I shared that video with you. I'll put it in the show notes. I promise I'll actually do the show notes this time. But that Venus Theory video where he talks about making art in the age of content, and I think I showed you that video because that is something that I'm struggling with. He set out to make a documentary. And then he's sort of just grappling with like everything feels like content, and there's all this content out there, and I'm doing a horrible job of summarizing what he was grappling with in the making of that video, or in what he was talking about in that video. But it resonated with me because it kind of makes you pop out of your, I don't want to say hypnosis, but your focus or blindness, whatever it is, on this thing that you're excited to do. There's no gatekeepers, and it makes me money, and all these things. And like, but what's really happening here?
Well, it's interesting because you talked about he was like, I want to make a documentary.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was like in high school, I was probably early high school, and me and a buddy and like my brother and my dad, we went to, we were going on a little vacation, like a car trip or something.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like the first year I could drive, and I drove, and we were just super excited about it. Me and my buddy were like, we're going to make a documentary. Right.
Yeah.
And it's just a goof. Like it's just some kind of copy of whatever you're making. I'm like 16.
Yeah.
But we filmed a ton of footage,
mm-hmm.
and it felt similar to what he would like. Obviously he's more versed in creating things.
Yeah.
He has a level of success, but he was like, yeah, I just had all this footage, you know, he's like opening the door, and like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, what is that? Like,
yeah.
I think everybody though has to go through that process. Not every, but most people
mm-hmm.
have to go through that process.
Yeah.
And they have to like go through that. Like when I first started taking photos, I was taking like Instagram photos.
Yeah.
You know, that was kind of the influence on, I'm going to take these photos and put them out on Instagram. And that's stuff. So like YouTube and Instagram, it's good because it can act as a motivator to get started. But the problem is when we're just putting everything out there from like, we all have to go through those stages.
Yeah.
You know, the greatest directors had to go through just making some shit to kind of figure out.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this and this work together, and like it's just iteration.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a more intuitive understanding with some people than others, but there's always iteration. You always have to start somewhere and go. And the iteration phase has just, it's almost expected that it's completely public now.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
And it has been for about a decade.
Yeah.
Maybe a little over. And I think like when you go completely public, iteration it needs to be experimentation. You need to be the scientist in the lab coat. You need to be willing to throw out all of your data, like throw out your journal, burn your journal, start a new one.
Yeah.
Throw out the experiment, do it again. And when everything's public,
mm-hmm.
you lose the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's afraid to look like an idiot. So why would you risk going over here and doing something that's completely different than everybody else is doing? Because the social stigma or the shame that'll come with, you don't even know how to expose right, or you don't know how to do this, or you don't know how to do that. Why would you risk that?
Yeah.
Especially, you know, you've been putting out videos, you know, in your experimentation phase for a couple of years, and you've got a subscriber base, or maybe you blew up. Maybe you have like 80,000 subscribers.
Absolutely.
Because something you said went crazy, because the algorithm isn't concerned with quality. It's concerned with like people's attention
and keeping people on the platform.
So maybe something, and you're kind of trapped into that, where like there is no room for evolution, because you've created this safety framework that you have to stay within, and there's a social construct, there's a social contract around it.
The audience expects more of that.
And you have to, you know, you have a reputation that you need to live up to. You can't just throw out. So I think something that's hurt art, or just the you know, creating work that is unique and meaningful. I think something that's hurt that is everybody's just being forced almost to evolve their skill set in front of a million people.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's necessarily the best way to, like, there's a reason when you're training for something that you don't know how to do, you're not doing it broadcast to the world. Like you're in a room with an instructor, and so I think it's, I mean, everybody remembers in school when you didn't know the answer to something, and you're in a class of 15 other people, maybe.
Yeah.
You're not going to raise your hand and be like, because you're risking getting that wrong and looking stupid.
Yep.
And I think when you apply that to a platform that broadcasts to the world, you're having to learn in real time, and it stunts that ability to evolve into to get that. And I think with that video, because I mean, yeah, he's just talking about, I shot a documentary, and I'm like, I've done that. I'm sure you've done that too.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what your first like foray into film was, but for a lot of people, I feel like it's just like you watch some movies, you kind of get an idea of what is, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to create a documentary. I'm going to write a little script or whatever. Yep. And you know, it's probably not going to be worth watching. But then the next one you iterate a little bit, the next one you iterate a little bit. And then after, you know, a decade, sometimes quicker, sometimes it's a couple of years. Right. You're going to be at a place, but your voice is going to be a part of that because you didn't have to do that in public. You could just try whatever came to mind. This is interesting. Let's try that. This is interesting. Let's try that. And yeah, it's just an interesting way that we do things now. And I wonder if, because we're a decade into that, if that's why it seems like everything is just derivative of everything. And for most cases, seems like there's like, oh man, content and then work. If there's but I do want to also preface, like before we talked, some people just want to make content about typewriters. Some people just, and for them, the artistic merit of that doesn't matter. Some people want to just talk about books, and they will see a video that they think is, and there's nothing wrong with that. So you have to live with like the duality of there's two different ideas that may not necessarily go together.
But I think for those instances too, you know, we talk about people that want to build community. They want to have that conversation around the water cooler, but now it's around my YouTube channel, and there's people in the comments, and I have a Discord or a Patreon or whatever. And I'm just really passionate about typewriters. I like to show me thrifting for them. I like to show cleaning them. I like to give pointers on where to get good, you know, ribbon ink and all this stuff. It's coming from a place first of a passion for that thing, like a really pure excitement for it. And in secondary to that, or tertiary, there is a desire to, you know, hey, if other people have been able to, you know, blow up and earn a living off this or supplement their income, and I can figure out how to reduce my dependency on a job I don't love or don't care about, you know, using these tools to enrich their lives or to improve their lives. I think what we really struggle with, you know, some of the things that you showed in the video that you showed me, this idea of it being this gold rush, this financial opportunity, and who cares what the cost is? Like, we're going to make this thing. It's the Jurassic Park quote. You want to make it, you want to sell it, you want to ban it, but you haven't actually thought about the repercussions or what comes from that. It's about something very, you know, whether it's greed or power, something that's just yucky. And I think we feel like we see some of that, and you know, we just don't like it. It just doesn't feel good.
It's almost like part of with you, like you have these passions and you're really like, you're passionate about them. And then you also have that artistic side. Yeah. And that urge to create work. Yeah. And you're really good at talking about the work. Yeah. And so it's like, of course, like you can, like you've done it. You've supplemented income to a high degree with talking about these things. You're good at that. And I think that, and then there's also this other skill set over here that's maybe not getting all the attention.
But I keep thinking if I do more of this content, then it's going to earn me enough revenue where I can slow down the content creation and ramp up the work. Yeah. Because, and that's what's funny is it just keeps delaying making work.
It's the computer, right? You're going to, once I get this computer, I'm going to write so much.
That's exactly right. And so how can I, and there's so many forces at play. There's meeting my financial obligations to cover my payroll through my business to myself, you know, paying back my reserve line if I had to get some money to cover things because I was waiting for an invoice from a brand to, you know, get paid. You know, there's all these forces of commerce and, you know, living in, you know, our modern society, having a mortgage, having car payments, all this stuff that pushes me towards content creation versus making work. Now, there's obviously plenty of people who've made work and then had you know, financial windfall or financial benefits, or they earn a living from that work. You know, millions of people, from whether it's music, film, painting, sculpting, whatever. And for them, there's always a mix, right? There's, you know, well, they want to have us make a song for the soundtrack, or they want to commission me to make a sculpture for the town square. Or, you know, you know, I want to paint a mural for the side of a building in, you know, downtown Creston. You know, there's always, you know, sort of that commission type stuff, or making content. And I think for me, making content it's my choice. I'm in control of it. I'm not answering to anybody. And there's an excitement and a thrill from all of that, coupled with earning revenue that keeps me from having to go get a job, which for me personally, someone who worked in a factory, worked at a grocery store, had jobs that I literally would be screaming on the inside going, I'm not doing what I want to be doing right now. And that feeling isn't creeping into making content, but I want to continue to level up my feelings of fulfillment. So content fulfills me in many ways. It checks a lot of boxes, but there's a few it doesn't check.
Yeah.
And so the point being,
you over-fulfilled me.
The point being is there are projects out there. The Ted Snow documentary, the project I talked to you about yesterday, photographing these old derelict satellite dishes, the 4th of July tents and the people that are selling that stuff. You know, I have work in my mind, and
fake work,
and fake work, and how can
all work? All work is fake work until it's.
And so when I look at next week, and I'm going to wrap up here. When I look at next week and I go, the weather's going to be great, the light's going to be good early in the day, later in the day, whatever, and I remember all these satellite dishes all around town that I want to go photograph, I'll sit there and tell myself, you can do that when you've got your content made, when you have this much money in your bank account, when you have these sort of conditions met to sort of give yourself permission, emotional permission to go make work. Because when you're making work that immediately has no financial benefit to you in the short term, you are being irresponsible because you have children, you have a car payment, you have a mortgage, whatever. You need to clock in first. And I keep thinking like, some brand deal is going to come through and it's going to be $5,000. And then it'll be okay to take a week to make work.
I mean, that's the hamster wheel that, I mean, even like, you know, talking about like, there's a lot of companies that fall for that same line of like, oh, we gotta do. Like, oh, let's go and think about this idea. No, we got to make sure we're doing the emails and and then everything just gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah. So, I sit there and I go, well, if having this approach, the sort of like getting permission to make work, these conditions have to be met. We talked about this yesterday with kids, like, oh, we'll have kids when all these boxes are checked. Like, they're never going to be checked. Just have kids. I think it's the same thing. Just make work. Because if what you're doing right now is not getting you as far as you want to go, this goes back to Seinfeld, the Opposite George episode. Do you ever see this?
Yeah,
episode?
Just do the opposite. Oh my gosh, just the most referenced thing I've ever.
Yeah. So, you know, and then this isn't the true opposite, but take a different approach. Maybe if you
if for those that haven't seen it, basically George is this. Has anybody not seen Seinfeld? I'm just going to assume that most people have seen it, at least know of George Costanza. But
Jerry tells him, he's like, well, if every decision you've made in your life is
wrong, do the opposite.
You to this, then by logic,
gets like a beautiful women. Like he gets a job with the New York Yankees. Yeah, it's just all of this great stuff happens to him
because he takes whatever his instinct is to respond to something, he does the opposite. So jokingly, but saying to myself, when you have that feeling, well, you can't go shoot that stuff that's more work. It's more the work until you do this thing with content or whatever, have this much money or whatever it is. Just don't do that. Do the opposite of that. Go make the work. Don't worry about those things. And maybe doing that will create some kind of cosmic alchemy that brings you closer to what you're hoping to achieve.
Yeah.
I think too, also just settling down about trying to find the balance between the design that you have for your life and these goals that you want to achieve, and just spending time floating in making things,
Yeah.
making work without all these outcomes and results.
Take yourself off of the timeline and just be a point.
Yeah, just be present. Like get in the flow and just make something that and I felt that when I wrote that piece after the guy tried to kill this Mac guy. I felt that in typing it and rereading it. And and now I'm not out there publishing it, submitting it to something like the New Yorker or something, and I certainly didn't like reread it, revise it, whatever. I'm like, okay, you just felt that, you made it, you put it out there, and that felt great. Do more of that, whether it's writing, taking photos, making a video, editing the Ted Snow project, like knock it off.
Yeah.
And I know we've referenced the Ted Snow thing numerous times, but I think honestly at this point, the biggest thing holding me back from working on it is I think I'm doing something wrong because it's not going to make me money right away.
Yeah.
And I just hate that.
Yeah. It's interesting how you can be so aware of like the issue at hand or like the conflict.
Right.
You're like, it seems like you're pretty self-aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
And still find yourself unable to.
Paralyzed by it.
Yeah. I don't know what the.
I think opposite George is the answer.
Opposite George is the answer.
Opposite George is the answer.
Do the opposite. Just
and see what happens. What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, well, I think that's something. That's a pretty profound way to look at things. It's like, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah,
and be honest with yourself.
Right.
Because it's easy to be like, oh, this is going to be terrible. And it's easy to lead with fear.
Sure. Yeah.
And maybe you don't, first of all, the choice, you're making a choice to lead with fear.
Right.
There's other emotions that you could lead with.
Mm-hmm.
So you're making a choice to lead with fear, and maybe make a choice to lead with a different emotion, and that'll change it'll change the structure of the problem in your mind.
Yeah.
By leading with a different emotion than fear.
But I do feel like, for me, to bring it all full circle, sort of the second half of this episode, making art in the age of content. And to me, making art in the age of social media and media deliberately influencing you to pay your mortgage, have new cars, have retirement savings, all of the stuff, checking all the boxes, being the good student of adult living, and all of that. I think those pressures, whether someone is sort of consciously pressuring you, a friend, a in-law, a parent, whatever, or the institutions, banking, the automobile industry, like, we want you to buy new cars, we want you to borrow money, we want you to do all this stuff, and all of those things funneling me towards just making content, turning out content, give YouTube what it needs. They need more videos, like, I need more views, I need more revenue, I gotta make this video about Apple, I gotta do a Final Cut tutorial, I gotta make all this stuff, and the art just doesn't get made because it doesn't help me with those two areas. In the short term, in that sort of immediate feeling.
Yeah.
And so art, for me, in the age of content, ends up getting set aside because it doesn't help me move forward the way content does.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't think art is ever meant to help you move forward in a financial way.
Yes.
It can.
It can, but
there's plenty of examples of
absolutely.
It happening. But, the purpose of expressing something to the outside world, something you're feeling, trying to get it into some form outside of you. Mm-hmm. It was never meant to be like as a piece of trade.
Exactly.
Like, I'm going to I'll give you this. And then somebody discovered, like, oh, you can kind of you know, you can build commerce around it. But man, this is like the commerce and art is something you can just talk about forever.
I know we talk about it
And-
all the time, but
but
it really
it's-
is something that has permeated everything. And
do you feel like maybe this is a good question for any, I mean, this might fall a little flat, but for anybody that has been listening for a while, that has kind of heard this before, do you feel like your thinking has evolved over the last, what have we been doing this for? 6 months, 8 months, whatever. Do you feel like your thinking has evolved over that time on how you approach commerce art? Like, are there any like new, like distinctively new realizations you've had or you've come to? I mean, obviously there's like the self-awareness that comes along with it and everything, but do you look at it a little differently than you did last year?
Because even kind of what started the conversation was, you know, sitting there realizing like you think you've been making work in a sense your whole adult life, but I haven't, you know?
Because we talk about this all the time, and today was like the first time I really have heard you be like, I feel like I just haven't made any real work.
No, because everything has been transactional. It's been using artistic tools, whether it's a style of editing or a camera or whatever it is, you know, using these tools to make something that feels creative, but ultimately it's for some commercial end. It's for me to get a paycheck, for a business to raise money, for them to sell widgets, you know, all this stuff. Writing screenplays that I sit there and you know, there's some deep aspect of bringing out what's personal for me and writing a diary entry through the screenwriting, but then on the other half going, all right, putting it through this filter of, if I go that route, the first act's too long, and if somebody's going to buy this screenplay, if they don't see the act break by page 28, you know, like it's gonna suffer from its commercial viability, its perception of commercial viability, you know. So even then, you're like making personal work. You're there's an element of a diary entry to it, to aspects of it, but ultimately the whole thing is governed by some commercial outcome. And I think there's just been this realization that the few things that I made or started to make that ultimately had no thought of commerciality or transactions, like you're saying, like art isn't, that's not what art's for. That's not where art comes from. I sort of, it's almost like you realize that and you set it aside. I really want to make this Ted Snow thing. You and I talk about it. We go and shoot it and all this stuff. And then like, oh, I've got this mountain of work to do to edit it, but it's not going to make me any money. So I can't do this. It's wrong for me to like, I don't even know if I know how to like you had this great comment that I thought about recently after we showed that Toy Maker documentary, which ultimately was something that looks artistic, but is ultimately kind of a commercial outcome. It was a short film for a film festival that was essentially commissioned, right? It was commissioned. And I think you had some comment in the studio, something about that, where like there's some feeling of marketing to it. There's something that it has a feeling of it being like a marketing video. And I think what you were feeling, not to suppose what you were feeling, was I think you just sort of knew where it came from. It was commissioned. It was for a film festival. It was, you know, and then I think you saw ingredients of previous documentary style marketing videos that I've made, that people here have made, that other people have made. And it had more of those hallmarks than a Wolfgang documentary or a Scorsese documentary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
I mean, there was a care taken to crafting it.
Absolutely. But it was not
you
art.
you can take all of the care and craft in the world and it can still just blend in with everything else.
Yeah. But I was like, I was drawing on all of the tools I used in the documentary style marketing content I was making for companies and, you know, all that, and making that. I wasn't like asking questions based on, I don't know, some artistic motivation to speak to this gentleman and, I don't know, learn more, explore what he's doing, ask some question, get answers, you know, whatever it is that makes somebody make a documentary.
Yeah.
And I feel like there was more of that with Ted. sitting there going, I'm not going to come in with a plan. I don't have some agenda. I just want to like sit with this guy with a camera rolling and just learn about him and hear what he has to say. What do you want to tell us? You know, I don't know. And then see how the footage plays out, find some through line, whatever it is. And I think because so much of my work has been like a deliberate outcome that the company wants from the documentary style piece that develops an emotional bond between them and the customer and blah, blah, blah. Like I don't even, like I couldn't even see how to look at it artistically. And I think maybe there's part of me that's afraid of like making it a marketing video because that's what I've done my whole, you know, the last 10 years. I don't know. But I think
there's almost, I wonder even if there's a way to like dialogue with yourself in the structure of,
yeah,
like asking yourself the questions, like, you know, when you're editing a piece or when you're, you know, like, what would the marketing decision be here?
Yeah.
Like, should that be like, how can you, you know, you're almost having that conversation or that thought that you just laid out.
Yeah.
In the piece that you're making.
Right. I think even Ted felt like, well, how can I use this to get me more gigs?
Ted was
whatever.
It was very focused on
leveling up with it.
Output.
And I think that,
and if it would have been cool if we had, like, if when you're directing, the realization that you just had, if we had that when we went into filming.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I do think that you know, in my mind, that's one of the more interesting ideas present in that is you're trying to bust this marketing idea.
Yeah.
And he's trying to
push it,
utilize you.
I'm trying to make art and he's trying to sell concert tickets or sell CDs.
Yeah.
Or get back in the studio or whatever.
Interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting.
And then part of me sits there and goes, maybe you're just sitting on this until you see it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Part of me goes, you're being, you know, you're being, I don't know, you're avoiding it. You're whatever it is, because you're scared or you don't know what you're going to make, or you don't know if you're an actual filmmaker or if you're just some content creator, marketing video guy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think everybody is, there is a sense to like, not everybody is, I've been playing with this idea a lot recently, where it's like not everybody is cut out to do everything that looks appealing to them.
Yeah.
And this, please don't take this as like,
no,
this is not,
not
this
all.
is not like commit. This is a thought from you ended on maybe just some marketing content. Like there's a lot, like I think it comes to realizing your strengths, but then also trying to align those strengths with, and like with you, I don't think there isn't a strength there. Like I've seen work from you that is very good work.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's almost creating the time and like also, you know, stepping away and being like willing to know that there's strengths and then that there's weaknesses. Like there's certain muscles that you haven't worked in a while because you've leaned so far into the content side of things, the marketing side of things. But, you know, for some people, like it's okay to accept that like there's some things that you're good at and there's some things that I see stuff all the time and I'm like, I don't want to say jealous, but like you see something and it's such a distinct pice of work. They see the world differently than I do.
Yeah.
And I always appreciate that so much because I can't do that. I'm not saying that like, but like when you see something that is distinct, you have to look at it. And like when I see something, I'm just like, I don't see the world that way, but it's fascinating how they see the world and I love it. And I couldn't copy it if I tried. There's just no way. And sometimes there's things that are commercially successful that are like that. Sometimes there's things that are just completely obscure that are like that. It's like, wow, that is unbelievable. Like, but not I couldn't do it if I tried a million years.
Yeah.
And not from like the sense of craft, talent, whatever, which that's probably also true, but you know, but also from the sense of they see the world.
Mm-hmm.
But what that person has done, if you flip the perspective,
Yeah.
they've just singled in on
Mm-hmm.
what only they can do. They've done that so effectively that they're creating from a place that nobody else can copy. So it's like I think a lot of people struggle to just have that honest conversation with themselves because they see something and it becomes this, you know, this thing that they can reach out and grab.
Yeah.
Like, I want to make it look like that. And it's just like, well, maybe you appreciate that aesthetic, but that's not your vision of the world. And you need to be creating from a place that is capturing your unique vision of the world. And I don't know how that conversation happens, but it's also, you know, talking about having muscles that you haven't worked in a while. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that involves a bit of, you know, maybe the term that's coming to mind is professional embarrassment, but, you know, we build ourselves up as these statuses and like we have these like, oh man, I've been in this industry for over a decade. Mm-hmm. Like I am well versed in da 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 da. And if you're unable to accept that there's certain things that you just have to start from beginner mind on, and you're like, I'm just going to avoid that so it doesn't make me look bad. Yeah. Then you're just setting yourself up for failure. Like you have to almost acknowledge, like, I don't know how to do that. I got to start from scratch there. And I think there's a lot of people unwilling to make that choice, to make the distinction in general of like, this is what I'm good at. I can't do this.
Yeah. And we've talked about that. I think people sometimes get paralyzed with not making things because the version in their mind is great, but if I make it and it's no good, I don't want to endure that failure. Yeah. I was thinking while you were saying that too, I think part of why I've connected with photography so much and the type, you know, I don't know if it's true street photography, but going out into the streets and photographing things, whether it's a shade of a lamppost on a building or a poignant moment with a mother and a daughter or whatever, that process is going out and then I see something and I take a photo. Yeah. There, you know, versus editing Ted Snow, which is a mountain of footage and I don't see it. Yeah. You know, I that connection with photography, and I think that's part of that exercising that muscle and getting used to it is going out, seeing something. You don't even have time to think about it. You just take the picture. Yeah. Right. And then you can evaluate it after the fact. Like, does this fit into a body of work I'm creating? What is the through line of this? Why did I take all these pictures? You're not, you know, and with editing a film, a documentary, it's harder to just sort of like, I feel this, and just go, and then revise, go, revise. Yeah. I do that in my writing. And so I think you need to just get used to that through whatever medium you're working in.
And like when you're editing most of the time, like your experience as an editor. Yeah. And, you know, maybe part of that like professional status is like fits in with your experience as an editor of, you're not as willing to just throw it all on the table and just like write it. Like, oh, here's an idea. Let's go down this rabbit hole. Right. And then you have to come back and just cross it all out. Because when you're editing for your channel or when you're editing for a video, there's deadline. You know what footage is there. You know what the final product is.
It's sort of pre-crafted.
These are the beats. Yeah. This is what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's plenty of great artistic work that is pre-crafted. Yeah. But it's almost a different type of pre-crafted. Yeah. Like there's a different group of muscles. Yeah. I hate to just bury that, but there's a different group of muscles involved. Yeah. And maybe part of that with Ted Snow specifically is like, you're so used to working a couple of those muscles, but then there's almost like an unwillingness to go back and just like, I mean, beginner mind comes to mind. Just work from a place of, I don't know anything about this. Yeah. Yeah.
And that could be, you know,
because I run into that problem all the time where there's some kind of ego block happening right now where I'm too important in my own mind to just start and act like I like to start from a place of
I don't
what
know.
goes next.
It's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I run into that all the time.
And I think I know too. And I know if I sit there and watch through all the footage and hear what he has to say, and I will see it.
Yeah.
I will see things.
You'll see. Yeah. You'll get ideas. Ideas will
Stuff
come.
will go
Yeah.
into the timeline. I'll craft it together. You know, like I could get, you know, part of me's talked about being a little you know, if I get super hyper fixated and I'm like, I have to see this through. This is going to be a 27-minute, not that I'm predetermined as 27 minutes, but this feels like it's going to be in that. I want to allow this time to breathe. Like maybe this is going to be 30 minutes long. And I think about that's going to be 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm going to be so hyper fixated on it that I'm going to set everything else aside. I'm not going to worry about money or selling a camera or getting another video up on my channel. And like all that fear of not being a responsible adult and father and husband, and art is a luxury and I have to work, I have to produce, I've got to churn out content, I got to make that money. Like that conflict. Okay. You know, focus on the content.
Yeah. Focus
on the things that get you paid. And, you know, Cody, you know, is I feel like been like, let's make stuff, guys. Let's do stuff. Like, let's, you know, you don't need to pay me. Like, I want to work with you guys.
Yeah.
I want to make a short film, whatever. And for me, it's like, you know, and I've been saying this for years, like, yeah, like, let me keep building this thing over here.
Yeah.
And it's going to, these conditions will be met. And then we can go spend 3 weeks making some short film that we can submit to the Omaha Film Festival and do all the stuff we've talked about at coffee shops for years.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
and then we keep saying that, and
I know
the band breaks up. And
yeah. Or it's like, well, Aaron got a new car, and you know, goalie needs braces. You know, it's like you're just gonna keep coming up with stuff that makes you avoid it, and then that goes to a whole other conversation. We're not going to go down this route, but it goes back to a previous podcast where we talked about, you know, the difference between people who execute on those visions. Artistic visions, the thing that they want to make, even if it's hyper complex like a movie, to the people that think about it in their mind. They've got great ideas, but then they never actually do anything about it.
Yeah.
And I'm a version of that right now.
And you don't have to execute those ideas publicly.
No.
There's nothing wrong with executing those ideas in a dark room.
No.
And keeping them in the dark room.
Yeah.
If you feel like you get to a place, and I think...
And that goes back to self-gatekeeping.
Self-gatekeeping, having that voice in your head
This
that
isn't ready.
Take a pause.
Yeah.
When like, you know, before you just say something,
yeah,
it's generally accepted that it's better to think about what you're going to say.
Yeah.
Unless you're two idiots podcasting, then you just say stuff and regret it.
Or someone like me that's just like, I think it, I feel it, send it.
But you know, you can make and now we have the ability to do. There's the platforms that are out there that just allow you to send it.
And the skills. I can make a video in
quickly
5 hours and say what I feel without vetting it, gatekeeping it.
And I think most of what we just say ends up, one of like the core tenets of this thing is, you know, it's constantly evolving. Don't take an idea that we said in episode 2 and just hold that idea is still a truth or a belief that we have 15 episodes later.
Right.
Because it might not be. It might be.
Yeah.
Might not be. I think there's core principles that have maintained that, you know, but everything's constantly in flux, and having the ability to do a little self-gatekeeping. Like, you can totally execute, you know, just executing doesn't mean executing in public. Maybe that's the way to sum it up.
Yeah.
It's just executing.
And I think that's a layer of this conversation that I wasn't bringing in. And I like that you're bringing that to the table as well. You know, everything you think and feel doesn't need to be turned into either content or what you think is a finished piece of work, because maybe it isn't ready. Maybe it isn't good enough. Maybe it isn't, maybe you weren't honest in making it. Maybe there was some result or commercial outcome or thought about the audience in making it, you know, all that stuff.
It is a numbers game though. The more you wrote that, you said it's funny you consider the piece of work the one thing that came to mind. You're like, I wrote a poem after. maybe if you write 100 of those just every day,
Yeah.
just like, oh, you don't have to put any of them out.
Yeah.
Maybe though you write every day for the next 50 days.
Right.
And then you come back to it a year later and you're like, oh my gosh, 14 and 36 are really good.
Yep.
There's something there.
Yeah.
So,
and I think with the photographs too, yes, I'm making content by going out with these digital cameras and taking pictures of stuff. But I think after a year, I just had my year anniversary for that channel being made. I'm going to get to a point where I've gone out over and over and over again. I'm going to start to see a piece of work within that stuff I'm making. Because even though I'm turning those photos into a piece of content ultimately, and it feels artistic, I'm not, there's some photos that I'll go out on a session and not include in the video.
Yeah.
But then there are photos that I include that if I was making work from those photographs, I wouldn't include in the work.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And this
there's like an expectation that you're just going to go out. This happens in photography, but it bleeds into writing. It bleeds into filmmaking. It bleeds into every cooking, whatever.
Yeah.
There's like this expectation that you can be good at something and just go out and get, take photos for a day and you're going to get like 6 good photos.
Yeah.
The reality, at least in my experience and probably in a lot, and I'll stick to photography on this example because it's the reality is you might go out for 15 weeks.
Yeah.
And if you're being honest, over the course of 20, 30, 40 years, hopefully, you're going to get nothing.
Yeah.
15 weeks, you could shoot 100 photos every day.
Yeah.
And you might have nothing.
Right.
If you look at some of the people that you admire in whatever medium or space, it's likely they're only known for a couple of things. Yes, that's public notoriety. There's a little bit of a difference there, but a life in 10 photographs.
Right.
When maybe they took 1 million. And I mean, I think it's important. So yeah, that comes to aligning, making sure you're not just doing it. You're doing it because you enjoy doing it. You're not just doing it for an end, because the end, YouTube videos have built an exception or an expectation that you're going to go out and shoot a roll of 36 and there's going to be 5 good ones.
Right.
Or 5 great ones.
Yeah.
Well, you could probably shoot 360 rolls of 36 and get 0 great ones.
Right.
Sometimes maybe just the universe is just open to you and you get 10 photos that just
are all-timers.
We've been there, that you're like, wow, this is great. But never set that as the expectation.
Right.
It's more of a meditation practice. You're not doing it for an end.
And also, I went out and I took these 47 photos and I felt artistic when I clicked to take the picture. Therefore, this photo, like I'm blind to actually judging it as a self-gatekeeper, what its quality is, what it's saying, whatever. I'm more attached to, I'm proud of myself for having an artistic feeling and snapping the picture. And therefore, that feeling is what makes the photo good when the photo may not be good enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have to watch out for that too. That's a different conversation.
You have to create a buffer, a barrier between you, creating the work. And you hear about that in film all the time. Yeah. That scene, that sequence took 3 days to shoot.
And
we spent $15,000 a shot.
Yeah.
It took, and then it just doesn't fit.
Right. It just doesn't
and
work.
the best, at realizing, or usually the best work is going to be able to be like, well, then get rid of it.
Yeah.
But there is going to be a camp where it's like, no, we spent too much time and money. We got to put it in.
Yeah.
I think from my point of view, that is objectively the wrong answer.
100%. Because you're answering to something other than the truth.
Yeah. The strength of the idea.
Yeah.
Well, we did it.
So
we didn't even talk about our little adventure.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do that next episode.
But
we'll create a buffer zone between.
This was good though, because it's one of those episodes where it's like, I need to work through some stuff and talk it through. And we've talked about this, like as we make this podcast, we can kind of feel when an episode is, I like I have strong feelings about this thing,
Yeah.
this topic, this idea, versus I'm kind of in this place. I'm feeling this way or that way, or this video kind of got me thinking. What do you think about it? You know, and having that conversation to work through it. Now, do I feel like I have more clarity? Absolutely. And, you know, and this podcast is, you know, hanging out with you has been really, really valuable for me to be able to work through that and go through that. So we came in a little bit, not 100% set on what we were going to talk about, but, you know, we started getting into it. So this has been very helpful.
We also hung out for, we spent like 12 hours together yesterday.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you know, we
didn't really talk about.
Yeah.
A lot of art you know, nothing that like I sat there actually hanging out and I was never like, this could be on the podcast. Almost everything
it's
really
funny.
wasn't related to it.
We like emptied the tank of everything else though, and then we kind of came in, and
which was kind of cool.
Yeah. And it's good too, because like I kind of set stuff aside for a couple of weeks, some of the stuff that I was working on, and then showing that to you kind of reignited a little bit of like
because I was curious.
Yeah. So
but hopefully for our listeners, you know, me having a therapy session with you to try to work through some of this stuff, you know, my hope is that for anybody listening that feels that they're in a similar place, that what we talk about is helpful and getting more clarity or getting a handle on it, or I kind of think that way, or that's been happening to me or whatever. So, and
then just really, I don't know if I'll even leave this in, but if you want to, you know, if you're subscribed to the YouTube channel and you're listening, and by God, you've made it to the end of the episode. If you do listen to long form, just like audio versions of podcast, if you wouldn't mind, subscribe to the audio version of this, whether that's it's on like Apple, it's on everything.
Apple, Spotify.
I don't know why, but I feel like that's getting into the just the weird perception I have. It feels like that's the sustainable thing. There's no, it has to be presented by the algorithm. It's just there in the feed. Right. If you don't do that, that's fine. I mean, a lot of people I know probably don't they listen to their podcast on YouTube, and that's why we put it there. But yeah, we've gotten excited about that metric a little bit.
Yeah.
Just because it just feels solid, like it's there.
Agreed.
We kind of control it. We pay for the hosting, and then, but anyways.
Yeah, good chat, buddy. Appreciate it.
A golden afternoon, and I remember having the familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with the summer. So